The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Planted with Sara Payan podcast. I'm Sara Payan, your host, and today I have a trifecta of talent that is here with me. I'm really excited to welcome back Jake Howard from Surfer Magazine. He's the editor-in-chief. Also welcoming back Scott Vasterling, founder of Humboldt Family Farms, and an entirely new guest. Welcome to Dustin Moore, the co-founder of Embarc. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I am so incredibly excited to geek out with you and talk about all the exciting things that are going on. But before we start, Dustin, since it's your first time on the show, I'm going to ask you the question I ask all my guests. What was your first cannabis experience?
So I won't share the age because it was far too young in most people's book, but not in mine. I had some very seedy cannabis and a soda can that I provisioned into, an Epic smoking device. And, while certainly based on my standards today, probably not exactly the experience I would seek in this moment in time, at that time, it changed my life. And I found while I've had abbreviated pauses and moved away from the plant, it's always come back to me and brought me, close with folks that I really enjoy spending time with, and has helped shape obviously the trajectory of my career and my partnerships. And it's pretty magical plant. And that's why we're all here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because that's a story that I've heard from a lot of people. It's like, you have experience with it when you're younger and, you have pauses with it. I know for myself, I did when I was younger. There was a time where I didn't use it at all, and then I came back to it. But then there's also like what happens in your life and how it comes back into it. Like, I always enjoyed it recreationally, but then when I got sick was when I really understood the medicinal aspects, and then looking at like how you don't always, not that getting high is a bad thing, because in our culture we have this thing about feeling good and having guilt around that, but also like just like creating balance in our lives through the use, and how when we look at cannabis now as it is as an industry, I think we miss out a lot on really looking at people who are using it moderately for wellness or for light enjoyment, things like that. And it's a huge swath of the marketplace that we haven't even really begun to tap yet. Just one of those things. It's like I found like during when we got into legalization, one of the things that I found was that more people were coming in saying, hey, now I don't have to talk to my doctor about getting a rec. Can I use it for sleep? Can I use it to chill out? I've got this elbow that bothers me. Will a topical help? And I thought it was really interesting that as we evolve, even though we are starting to forget, or maybe people are just more reluctant and a little bit nervous to talk about the positives that happen with our bodies when we use cannabis, but more people are taking advantage of it more than ever. And I think part of the conversation, getting out to people and having them explore the possibilities, is the project that the three of you are working on around normalization. Who wants to talk about it? Who wants to start? Because I'm just so excited to dig into this.
Scott, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I could. I think going back to the story that Dustin just told also about the first time using cannabis. I mean, growing up in San Diego on the beach, I was using cannabis in very small amounts, but it would enhance my surfing or my enjoyment of surfing. And so surfing happens under the sun, right? And I think Humboldt Family Farms, that's one of the biggest challenges that we face at retail, frankly, is the sun-grown mindset, right? We had pre-Proposition 64, there was a pretty healthy established market under Prop 215 with medical, but then transitioning, we saw the proliferation of like really large farms that were cultivating specifically for extract, for vapes and edibles and things like that. And I think the consumer got a little confused about sun-grown being specifically for an extract versus a craft flower market. And so I think that's really where, Humboldt Family Farms, we kind of took our history in the cafe and the way we were curating for a menu and started curating for a menu with cannabis, but trying to shift the mindset towards that sun-grown lifestyle. And I think that when I was introduced, not just to Dustin, because the Embarc ecosystem and Dustin and the people involved with Embarc, and I'll let him tell you about their commitment to sun-grown and craft farms, which has been I mean, that all of this happens because of their support of our community of craft farmers. But then also when I was introduced to Jake, and all of a sudden it was like this light bulb of like, you don't surf under fluorescent lights, you surf outside, right? So all of a sudden, as Dustin mentioned earlier, it was this real natural blending of all of these things that we could actually create kind of a campaign about shifting the mindset of consumers about the things that you love to do. And I would be willing to bet that most of the time, people, when they go outside, whether it's for a hike or gardening or anything, that whenever you feel that sunshine on your face after it rains or after you've been inside for a while, there's the feeling can't be replicated. And I think that that's the feeling that we're trying to shift into the mindset of consumers around this campaign with Surfer Magazine and Embarc.
Yeah, I mean, we're sun powered, right?
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
And to Scott's point, I think, Scott and I met actually advocating for responsible, sustainable policies that would benefit those who came before us and the legacy and the craft of sungrown. And it was part of the charge that Lauren and I had, embedded in us when we opened our first Embarc in Tahoe. And we found that while we were huge sungrown advocates at the counter, it was harder to educate, our guides on the importance of sungrown and just candidly the benefits. I mean, full stop, it's the best, cannabis that you can consume for a whole host of reasons. But I think what Scott's been able to do is take that same ethos and charge that, that has always been a part of him, but a part of our business, and figured out how to partner with us in a way where, Scott has gone in at scale and educated our guides across our entire fleet. And because of this partnership, the goal that we had in starting Embarc was really to bring the best craft cannabis to consumers. We don't grow it ourselves. And I think, as we shift away from selling cannabis, which cannabis is a commodity, and it's unfortunately, as we see in the industry right now, a race to the bottom, we are selling experiences. And, for us, like as Scott is explaining, that sun beating down on you after a rain, like that's an experience. Cannabis enhances that experience. It's just, so I think as we move away from, highest THC at lowest price, which, unfortunately, I think the industry has trained the consumer in some ways. I have a great amount of hope that the roots of where we all came from are being kind of reborn, if you will, in this newer market. And I think, Sarah, as you mentioned, there's a lot of these folks that are kind of curious. They did not come out in droves during legalization, but I think as we continue to normalize the plant, we are starting to see that frequency pick up. And I think that is the future of our industry, is the folks that are really conscious about what they're putting into their bodies and aren't just looking to get, high at the, at the cheapest price.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in the past, sun-grown cannabis has gotten a really bad rap. I know, like in the 215 days, I was actually talking to Johnny Casale recently, and he was like, Sarah, some of that stuff that you were selling in the 215 days as indoor was just really good sun-grown. And the larfy stuff, everyone was calling sun-grown. And yes, it was, but it was like on the low end of the spectrum of quality. So we were doing that so that we could sell our products. They were not only good, they were better than a lot of the things that you were seeing behind your bar. And I was like, that totally makes sense. And getting consumers to understand, like, I think that, and I don't like making the comparison, but it's the closest thing I can think of is like when we look at grapes and wine and people who really get into, the enophilistic aspects of wine and talking about terroir and all of that. I mean, when you look at sun-grown cannabis, you have a greater diversity of terpenes and minor cannabinoids just due to the fact of environment and where it's being grown. And so to be able to turn people onto that, I think it also kind of engages that nerdy side of their brain where they're like, oh, I want to learn everything about what I've got in this jar. And when we look at the race to the bottom with prices or, that fight to the top with THC, it is really important to let consumers know that that is not the end all be all. And for retailers to understand that if you're doing sales for people to come, that's not retention. It's creating those relationships and having that relatability that has people coming back to you time and time again because, you're a trusted source you give great information, they feel comfortable where they're at, and they see themselves in what you're doing. And I think that those are all really important parts of the picture, which is also, I think, why it's really, really interesting and important, the collab that you're doing with Surfer Magazine, because there's there's a relatability aspect that maybe a lot of people weren't even considering.
Yeah, I think something that Scott and I had talked about earlier, and is kind of weaving through this conversation, is just the importance of culture in all of this, right? And the sun-grown culture, the Embarc experience is a lot like a surf shop in a lot of ways, where you're getting, it's somewhere where you purchase things, but it's much more than that, right? Like in surfing, sometimes surf shops are called temples of Stoke, kind of, right? And it's a place for people to get together and you'd share information, share experiences, tips, advice, whatever the news of the day is, whatever that is. And I think those bonds, especially, the connection of surfing and cannabis, there's really, committed, deep-rooted cultures in both of those aspects, and they intersect in a lot of ways. And that's what's really so fun about all of this, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the activation this summer? Because when I was learning about it, I was just super, super excited, because it's in the magazine, which is exciting, but there's also things that are going on in Embarc as well.
Yeah, this Friday, June 20th, the day before summer.
Solstice.
That's right, summer solstice, day before International Surfing Day.
Oh, right on.
Right, and it's dropping in 16 Embarc stores. Is that right, guys? Throughout California.
Mm-hmm.
And
thrilled about it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. The art features a classic photo on it from John Severson, the founder of Surfer, who himself was a partaker in cannabis, and yeah, it's just one of those funny, cool things. The world works in mysterious ways, and when Scott and I kind of synced up, it was like, of course, like this makes so much sense. And Scott can talk a little bit more about the strain and the product that's coming out.
Yeah. I mean, it was just a natural thing with the strain types. I mean, we are Maui Wowie. It's been on our farm for over 15 years. And it's right in line with the surfing culture. So we dropped that. And then we're also dropping from Nick at Full Moon Farms, who's one of our great farming partners. And I know good friends of Sara, of yourself and Jeff and the family. And we're dropping a pineapple upside down cake flower with him also. And then of course, Tina with Moonmade Farms, another phenomenal farmer up here in Humboldt County. And we're dropping her Hawaiian Fanta. So all kind of in the theme of the surfing. We've got the 3-pack of pre-rolls of Surfer in the Tube, which I thought was kind of a fun play on words. That's dropping along with the flower bags again here on June 20th. And they'll be available through the summer. So, I mean, I think this is not just a single drop, but we've got a couple of fun things happening throughout the summer. We're also raffling off some cool things. We had Colton. He did an amazing surfboard that we'll be raffling off. There'll be one that will be live at the Ventura store, and then the other one that will be raffled off through the Passport Club. And I just saw a sneak photo of that yesterday, and it just looked absolutely beautiful. So it actually reminded me, now that we're talking about it, my very first surfboard was a San Miguel that my dad gave me when I was in 6th grade, when I was like ready to transition. I was standing up on my boogie board. And he's like, all right, let's get you a surfboard. And it was this old San Miguel that had a very similar design of that pattern with the lines and the different colors of the rainbow almost on the front of that surfboard. So when I saw that yesterday, Jake, that like I had a really emotional,
awesome,
goosebumpy vibe to it that made me feel really good. So I was just thrilled that worked out so well.
Yeah, and then also the pre-rolled tubes are reclaimed ocean plastic, which I think that's important to note, because this is a full circle kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. And the bags are also an ocean reclaimed plastic. I think at about 50%, but still, it's Sana is our packaging partner, and they do a fantastic work out there for this particular project.
That's so cool. It's all around California ethos. It's good cannabis, surfing, And, we're very, very concerned with the environment here and looking for different ways to help make, the world still exist for our kids and nieces and nephews and grandchildren. I mean, it's just so incredibly important. I think especially with, with legalization and how packaging changed, it's like we have to do a lot as an industry to step up and really push forward. Yes, okay, we have to have packaging so that it's childproof and that people stay safe. But we also have to look at the impact of the aftermath when that product's done. But speaking of those bags, I heard that those Friday bags sell out. And if that's not creating surprise and delight for consumers, I don't know what is.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think this one's going to be even more special, and a big shout out to my dear friend Tina Gordon. And Scott and I took a walk last week, and so I got a preview, and it's the pre-rolls are fantastic. So I'm very excited for this drop, and I think I've been inspired by this conversation because it, pulling back to culture and thinking about, the great work of Surfer Magazine and shaping culture. And I think just as I sit and I reflect, we have history on our side, talking about environmentalism, talking about, basically all cannabis was sun-grown until the war on drugs, when, stigmatization and, criminalization pushed cannabis indoors. At that point in time, pop culture grabbed a hold of that, and that became, a centric message around, indo and all of the different ways that cannabis was framed as being indoors. But now, when we're able to reach folks through Surfer and through the work we're going to be doing at a special concert in Golden Gate Park this summer, and the billions of views that we get around the work we do at the state fair, the pendulum will swing back to sun-grown cannabis, especially when you think about the inputs that it requires to grow indoor versus sun-grown. I mean, when Scott and I started working together from an advocacy perspective, we had this really cool infographic, and I wish I had it here to show, but it was the number of households it took to like household energy it took, power it took to create 1 pound of cannabis versus using the sun, right? And I think over time it just is going to make sense. But I'm really proud, to be working alongside partners like all of you, to help that pendulum swing back in its rightful place. So this is just this is the first time I met several of you, and it inspires me that we're all in the same wavelength and charge here.
Humboldt Family Farms is rooted in the legendary hills of Northern California, where cannabis isn't just grown, it's lived. As one of the top sun-grown cannabis brands in the state, Humboldt Family Farms represent a collective of multi-generational family-run farms deeply committed to sustainable practices, environmental stewardship, and the craft of cultivation. Every harvest reflects decades of knowledge and a deep respect for the land, the plant, and the people who enjoy it. Now, they're partnering with Surfer Magazine and Embarc for a first-of-its-kind collaboration, the first time in Surfer's 65-year history that they've ever partnered with a cannabis brand. The drop includes Humboldt Family Farms' iconic Maui Wowie flower and Hawaiian Fanta pre-rolls. You'll find the collab exclusively at Embarc locations across California, and a limited number are dropping as part of Embarc's weekly Getaway Bag series, a fresh tote every Friday packed with California's best cannabis. And it sells out every time. Embarc has earned its place as California's most trusted cannabis dispensary, but they're not just selling cannabis. They're creating experiences that connect people to the plant and proving that it can be a force for good. They're pioneering what normalization looks like, bringing legal sales and consumption to places no one thought possible, like the California State Fair and Cali Roots. This summer, they'll do it again at Dead & Company's 60th anniversary in Golden Gate Park, followed by their 5th year at Outside Lands, with Humboldt Family Farms right alongside them. Every Embarc location gives back 1% of sales to its local community, helping fund youth drug prevention programs and logging thousands of volunteer hours across California. A collaboration like this with Surfer Magazine and Humboldt Family Farms is an extension of this mission. It proves that cannabis can exist in mainstream culture, that it belongs in iconic spaces alongside one of the most demanding sports in the world. This is what progress looks like. For more information, visit Humboldt Family Farms at HumboldtFamilyFarms.com, Embarc at GoEmbarc.com, and Surfer Magazine at Surfer.com. It's super exciting. It's super exciting. I feel like when I first started, there were a lot of lovely people that I met, but there was also some significant gatekeeping that I think made it hard for people to be engaged and learn more, because it was kind of like, oh, who's got the most cred? And it's like, well, how about letting people enjoy and learn, and let's see what happens? Because there are some, as we've seen with legalization, there have been some amazing people who have come from other industries with their knowledge and skills, but also the heart and the curiosity around this, which is a big part of how we grow this in a way that's not only healthy for the industry, but adds something just to our culture in general, like in continuing that conversation. I think I'm so excited about the state fair coming up. There's so much going on around that, but also just like the combination of concerts and cannabis, because as we all know, people snuck it in. Like I remember even like, and okay, now I'm totally going to age myself, but in the 90s when I moved here, and I remember I was at a concert and my friend had a cigarette, and this was when they started stopping allowing cigarettes in concert venues and bars and things like that. Someone pulled it out of her mouth, but they were still passing joints around. I was like, that is so California.
Yeah.
That
Very
is not,
California.
yeah, it's not going to stop. But it's really nice to see, like, cannabis and music go so well together. It's also part of just communing together and sharing something with, your friends, or even making a new friend by sharing like some great flower. But to have that be happening at venues and people don't have to do it on the down low, and it's more of a celebration of it, I think is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, again, like bringing it out into the light, back to our solar powered theme. We spent so much time in Prohibition days hiding it and sort of sneaking around, and be able to talk about it openly is and share it and experience it together is, again, that goes back to the culture of it, and kind of cannabis is better shared than solo sometimes, and when you're at a concert, even better, or at the beach.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just at Stanford Stadium, I guess, for their first concert that they've ever done there. And, they were checking for everything. So everyone's vapes and everything had to be tossed. And I was like, oh. And I was thinking about, actually, I was thinking about a lot of the things that you guys are doing this summer. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice when instead of that, it's like you could just leave everything at home and know you could pick up something inside.
I remember when I was fortunate enough to be able to see Dead & Co. at the Sphere in Las Vegas. And it was an amazing show for 3 nights. And I'm excited for the Golden Gate shows coming up here at the beginning of August as well. But I remember opening my bag going in, and the first night I was so nervous because, of course, I had my pre-rolls and all that stuff. And the guy looked at it and he's like, okay, just, some cannabis pre-rolls, all that stuff. He's like, no weapons? I'm like, no. He's like, come on in. I was like, it just made me feel so good. Now, being able to purchase inside would be a whole nother experience. But the fact that they're not gating it at the security, I thought that was just a fantastic way to allow people, because clearly there is a big cannabis consumption at those types of shows. And so to be able to just let the consumer experience it freely, I think was just a really fun way to see it happening.
Yeah, well, I know how much the margaritas cost inside the Sphere, so I wonder how much a joint would.
Right? But I think it's cool because again, I think one of the things that, in working at a lot of these events with Embarc and Dustin and his team is creating the opportunity to speak directly to these consumers in a way to share the experience of what we're doing with Humboldt Family Farms, and then having them come back and share their experiences, right? We want to provide positive experiences. And so I think that the way that we curate our menu and our products going into some of these events is very specific, right? Towards a positive experience. We don't have always the highest THC. In fact, one of our most popular products that we sell at these events is our CBD blends, where you're hitting 10% THC and 8% CBD, but it provides a super positive experience, maybe for someone that is, again, cannabis curious, but you don't want you don't want to like white knuckle them in the corner, right? Like you want them to enjoy the experience, the concert, the state fair, those types of things. And so I think that I've learned a lot about the curation of a menu for an audience at specific shows, whether it's a full day festival or just a short show. It's been a lot of fun to curate the same way that we curated for the surfer drop, right? I mean, it's very specific strains and packaging and all that. It's been a lot of fun at a time in an industry where you can always find things to complain about. But it's much more fun to do things that you enjoy doing and working with people that you love spending time with, because ultimately that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, when I think about Maui Wowie, I think about moving around outside. Like it's a nice, uplifting, but not like super edgy, flower. And then that Hawaiian Fanta is like sunshine in a jar.
It is good.
Yeah.
You can't say Maui Wowie without smiling.
No.
It like immediately makes you smile.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care who you are. Like, yeah.
It's totally universal. But I'll tell you, like when I worked behind the bar, one thing I used to love was, especially like a guy of a certain age, pulling out a jar of Maui Wowie. That and pressed hash would bring the grins like nobody's business. It's like, do I have something for you? But then they'd start asking me for Thai stick, and I was like, yeah, that's not. We don't have that right now. I don't know if we'll ever see that, but I sure would love to see that coming back. But we are seeing that. Like there are, as we're getting into this and really looking at like the experience and the rich culture, we're seeing, especially with the craft growers, bringing back things that we find nostalgia from. And one of the things that I love too is, especially with the craft farmers, going and visiting and seeing everybody's farms. And I always like to think about, having like conversations around cultivation and styles. And there'll be people who'll be like, oh, well, my way is the best. Oh, my way is the best. But it's like, the thing I've learned is that all these different farms have very different personalities, and they have differences in their methodologies that reflect their personalities, and it's really shown in the beauty of the flowers and just how distinct they are. And I really, really appreciate that. I mean, you go to Nick's farm, it's very different than Tina's farm or some of the other small farmers that are up north, and it's fascinating because not only do you get to see their methodologies, but it's always very much entwined with their stories. And having those stories be heard by consumers, I think, is a very important thing too, because yes, we talk about cannabis as CPG, but it's a plant, it's cultivated. It takes the sun and care and growth to become what it is when we see it, in a retail experience.
Yeah, and we see those stories really are kind of the foundation to normalization. So I think when we look at, the stores where folks are coming to us, they've already made that choice that in that particular moment in time, they want, to interact and to purchase cannabis, right? I mean, that's
Right.
really how binary it is. They're looking for an experience, of course, along the way, but being able to take the four walls of retail and to drop it into some of the largest events in the world, you're able to reach folks who decided that day to go see live music. And at the same time, when presented with this opportunity, they may have never experienced cannabis before. They may have stepped away from it for decades. They, for whatever reason, they've searched for that particular experience while they're at that event. And then, putting cannabis in front of them, and for a farmer to tell that story directly about the cannabis, that they've, shepherded through an entire process, it breaks down these barriers. And then that one person goes and explains that experience to two more people, and it really does just start to, extrapolate from there. And I think that's what's unique about what we do at live events, because given the challenges that we all face in advertising and just creating advocacy and awareness of what responsible normalization looks like, this really kind of levels the playing field, and you can get to folks that you can't otherwise. And our data tells us that. When we look at the data that we see at these events, and we start to see the repeat customers that are coming back and want that same experience, like that's how we move this industry forward. So it's really exciting to have partners, like Scott and Humboldt Family Farms, integrally related to those activations. And we've already done one this year at Cali Roots. We work with some phenomenal promoters who are far ahead of their time. Another Planet Entertainment has been doing Outside Lands for a very long time. They embrace cannabis early. Don't want to let the cat completely out of the bag, but if you are seeing a Grateful Dead and Co show for the 60th anniversary, August 1st through the 3rd, you may find Scott and I there, with some of Tina's Flower and others. But as we look at those that were really kind of willing to be on the edge of the earth on this, we are moving it forward. And at the same time, this is still very early days. I mean, there's still, as we all know, we live in a bubble, and there's still places where people are being, persecuted, severely for cannabis to this day. But, I think California's always been a bellwether, will continue to be a bellwether. And I think, we're going to we have and will continue to shape the international cannabis conversation.
Yeah. And I think opportunities like these events, I mean, it's almost akin to, like when you go on vacation, you try something that you never did before, you really enjoy it, and then you want to replicate it when you get home. It's kind of like that.
Yep.
And
Totally.
and then, when you look at the bigger picture, when we look at policy, and when I was in Barcelona this year, I was having a conversation with Bo Whitney. Bo is an economist, and he does a lot of lectures on, cannabis and economics. And I was asking him, how do we get our elected officials and regulators to create better policy? Because the one thing that I've noticed when we look at policies, I was like, well, who took the Econ 101 class? Especially with the things that we're seeing here in California, like overtaxation, high cost of entry. And instead of including everybody in the market and allowing the free market to figure out who wins and who doesn't, we have a very, very rich traditional market. And then we also have to pay for enforcement with that. And with the possibility of excise taxes going up this summer, we could be seeing extinction events of people who have been doing everything they can to reside in the legal market. And then the state of California is extraordinarily disappointed that they're not making the tax revenue that they were expecting. And one of the conversations that I've had with regulators is, if you lowered the taxes, you lowered the barriers to entry, you would have everybody participating in the market. And though, per sale, you might not be seeing as much taxes as you like, at the end of the day, you would be making money hand over fist and not having to spend as much money on enforcement. And I think, when I was talking to Bo about it, he's like, Sara, policy isn't made based on facts. Policy is a very emotional thing. And that is the thing that you need to get your head around when you're looking at policy. And it's a very important lesson to learn, because I'm a very logical person. I think government, policy, it's all going to make sense. Well, we're people. And we don't make sense, and we're very emotional. But I think that this normalization is also a call to people getting more involved and talking to their officials that depend on their votes to keep their jobs, and saying, I am a productive member of society. I pay taxes. I use cannabis, and I vote. And it's a big thing around normalization, so that we can actually shape this policy in a better way. Because I feel like a lot of the stigma around cannabis has really bitten us in the butt too, with some of the policies that we're seeing.
Well, and
Yeah, the data that just came out for this quarter, we've seen the biggest decline in revenue. We didn't see a decline in transactions. We saw a decline in average price. And what you're describing, is like trying to explain to politicians, in a democratically controlled state, which I'm proud of, but seeing, trying to explain the Laffer curve of lower the tax, get more revenue. There's a disparity there, and I agree with you. It's such an emotional, issue, and that's the root of politics. And it's like, this is not where common sense necessarily prevails. Sorry, Jake. No, no. Well, to add to that too, it's also so geographical, right? You have California is a massive state, and when I come home to visit family in Northern California, it's considerably more relaxed than it is somewhere where I live, like Orange County, which is a much more conservative place. So, yeah, it's also very nuanced, right? The policy of it,
Yeah.
and just the way different geographical regions accept it or don't accept it, or whatever that may be, fall somewhere in the middle.
It's interesting because it's, it's definitely a bipartisan issue, but there's been some fabrication to make it more of an issue that, oh, all these liberals like it. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily true. Everybody likes not everybody, but a lot of on both sides, a lot of people like cannabis. Like, I've had Michael Steele on the show a couple of times, and he has often said if the Republicans that enjoy and use cannabis would actually admit to it, we would be having less issues on a federal level around cannabis policy.
Well, we know that to be fact. I mean, look at what's happening with the hemp THCA beverages in red states. It's where they don't have access to cannabis, but they have access to these hemp beverages because they love cannabis.
Yeah.
I mean, the sales are going to outpace tequila soon on those beverages. We, not to get into the weeds of regulations between hemp and cannabis, same exact plant, right? But the reality is that like it is that is a way in which normalization is occurring in those Republican-led states. And I think they're seeing firsthand the demand that their constituents have for regulation of cannabis within their states. And I think personally that's a great first step in starting to open up the conversation about federal legalization on both sides.
Absolutely. And if we could get out of our own way and work together, could you imagine the sheer lobbying power that we'd have?
Well, looking at where we are, so what I find to be, encouraging, I totally agree, Sarah, with your point that this is a very popular issue now, right? So you look at polling over the last decade, and cannabis is now fully mainstream. So much so that in the last presidential election, you had both parties endorsing some version of legalization rescheduling. That's just never happened before. If you looked at the battleground states, cannabis was a top 5 issue in deciding, many of these really critical swing state elections. And what that means to me is that, we in some ways now are a political pawn. I think, as an example, some of the federal reform will get dragged out into the midterms for obvious reasons, but it's no longer an if, it really truly is a when. I know people have been saying that for a long time, but when both parties have aligned on, cannabis reform, we are very much part of the conversation. Now it's just a matter of how we as an industry come together and shape it. And I think that's been one of the other challenges that we hear from regulators and from government generally, is that there's been such a fracture within the industry, and that, you'll have multiple stakeholders coming and asking for different things. And it's, the common refrain from those legislators and regulators is, until you guys can agree on something, we're not sure how to help you. I will say, though, that these extinction events and this, impending tax increase, I think, has brought the industry together around compromise for common goals. And I am encouraged to see that even this year in California, as we've seen almost the entire industry aligned behind, the tax reform issue. And it's, I truly agree. It's like, this is existential to the industry. And, but given where we sit today as an industry and the political power that we do have, I don't think we're that far off from seeing, some pretty significant reforms. It's just what do we do with those? And we want to make sure that they're shaped in a way that are core to who we are as an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got to ask you, Dustin, when you look into your crystal ball, how long, what do you think as far as legalization? You think it's in the next decade? What do you think?
Are you looking for a lasting, meaningful way to connect with your audience and highlight your brand? Well, listen up, because Planted with Sara Payan is taking on new sponsors. Here's a powerful stat. 20% of listeners are more likely to support brands they hear about on a trusted podcast. And 60% actually look up that product after hearing about it. That's the power of podcasting. Planted with Sara Payan has a unique draw. With remarkable guests, we attract and engage audience that spans all sides of the cannabis spectrum. Picture your message reaching these listeners time and again. Podcast ads are evergreen, meaning your brand stays relevant as new audiences discover and binge past episodes. It's a long-term investment that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a targeted, passionate audience with lasting impact, the right listeners are here waiting to meet your brand. Visit plantedwithsara.com to get a copy of our sponsorship deck today.
I think full federal reform is going to take generations. I think there's going to be kind of bites at the apple. I think we have more states legal than not legal now. I think realistically, we see some version of reform between now and the midterms. I would guess that it happens probably next spring to next summer. Likely maybe after the primaries are cleared, just because, the House is likely going to change control unless Republicans can figure out some sort of a strategy. And I think cannabis could be a part of that strategy to turn out the 18 to 21-year-old vote, which is typically the most, depressed when it comes to turnout. So I think we see that sort of reform take place. And I think we see, based on the present administration, I think we see large deference to states. I think that unfortunately continues to create a patchwork of supply chains and, different markets that create their own challenges. But, I do think we're probably a full generation, if not more, from some sort of a national, industry. But in some ways, that's great, because what we have to ensure is that along the way, those who got us here, the heritage, the craft, and, these farmers that were willing to risk their life and freedom don't get left behind. And I think that is something that, if we're not mindful of, could happen. So in many ways, I'm actually hopeful that in some ways federal reform is delayed for the simple reason that we can't lose the reason why we're all here today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about it, it's an exciting thing to think about federal reform. But then if we get legalization on the federal level, it's like, well, what other taxes will be slapped onto what we're already dealing with? And I'm wondering too, because when I think about craft farmers, I also go back to the wine thing. Like, throughout the United States, I mean, I'm originally from Michigan. I could drink Michigan wine, but if I compare to Michigan wine to a California or even a Washington wine, I'm like going to choose that over, a cherry wine from Traverse City. I love you, Traverse City, but it's the truth. What do you think as far as like interstate commerce? And I mean, I look at it as a way for craft farmers to be elevated and to really be able to do just to be able to put out more flower and have it be appreciated. Do you think that that's a possibility? I know that, when we look at the multi-state operators, they're not excited about interstate commerce because they like everything to be concentrated in their areas. But I think that it would be a really healthy way for us to grow and to also be able to keep all these legacy operators and preserve legacy genetics as well.
I completely agree. And I think, the irony is we have interstate commerce today with the same plant. It just happens to be hemp. And without getting into the nuances of the policy, like, it's so hard to sit here as a practical human being and realize we have interstate commerce. And a lot of it is, California cannabis that is now being deemed as hemp. And I'm not, that's not a commentary on this. It's more just to be evocative of the paradigm and the hypocrisy within the paradigm we live in today. I agree with you that many of the larger lobbying forces are going to cram down interstate commerce. There's also, all of these states have individual bureaucracies set up to regulate a plant that in many ways would discourage interstate commerce. I think California will be the leader. We saw last year in the legislature, there was a policy that unfortunately failed that was going to bring together Oregon, Washington, California, and I believe Arizona, and maybe several other states, to create a pilot framework for interstate commerce. And I do know that, the California political will would have interstate commerce here today. But as we're also very well aware, we are the resistance in the union. And right now that makes anything that we want to accomplish a challenge against, the party that's in power today. So, we will continue to be a victim of politics. And that's just the world that we all live in. I just think that cannabis is like the tip of the spear. When you look at everything that is challenging in society, cannabis can really kind of point to the most exacerbated circumstances, because you see it playing out in our day-to-day lives with this political quagmire that we live in. So I know that's not fully answering the question around interstate commerce. I just think that we're going to probably, even if there is federal reform, the interstate commerce that's occurring today will continue. When like regulated interstate commerce comes, I think that's a ways out.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we have some, especially like, you were saying, going back to hemp, it's like we have some good case studies to work off of, even when we look at like normalization in social events, because there are several states that allow hemp beverages to be sold at bars alongside of alcohol. And I know when I was the co-chair of the legalization task force in San Francisco, and we were talking about events and consumption lounges and things like that, that was one of the biggest things that we talked about. It's like, how do you have cannabis and alcohol in the same space? And everybody's like, oh my God, people are going to green out. It's going to be crazy. And it's like, yeah, well, you know, crossfade isn't fun. But when you look at doing events that create normalization, like what you're doing with the state fair, with music venues, things like that, that's part of the learning process where as things get normalized, people understand what a reasonable dose is for themselves or a reasonable serving. Because you can purchase as much, you know, alcohol as you want, as long as you're like not stumbling around, but nobody's swigging bottles of Everclear just for the heck of it.
Well put.
You know, and I mean, that's when Minnesota started doing that. I was like, you know, this is awesome. Now we're going to see, like, they aren't having any problems. They're not having people, you know, stumbling around cross-faded in bars. We can make this happen. Because I know, you know, there are people who prefer alcoholic beverages. There are people who prefer cannabis. And guess what? They like hanging out.
And we were able to accomplish that, you know, in 2018 at the Emerald Cup, working closely with, it was the Bureau of Cannabis Control. And while they were separate and distinct premises, they did really seamlessly integrate. And, you know, when you look at cannabis events that even have the presence of alcohol and you look at calls for service, to your point, Sarah, it's like, it's far fewer than those that sell alcohol exclusively. So if anything, when you introduce cannabis into a licensed alcohol premise, calls for service actually reduce. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's not. And we have enough data, you know, that all of the events that we activate at also sell alcohol. And again, while we have to maintain the separate premises, you know, our cannabis areas that have folks that have been consuming alcohol, again, no calls for service. And it's just one of those things that I'm really proud of, that we're starting to collect enough data that we can go to the policymakers and make a rational case where it's not just feelings, there's facts involved, which is important.
Yeah, it's so important to have those facts. And when you're getting feedback from consumers, what are you hearing? I'm imagining there's got to be a lot of excitement.
I mean, Scott, honestly, you talk to more I deal with regulators a lot on site, and I'm kind of doing that part. But I will tell you, Scott has probably sold more cannabis, licensed cannabis at events than any human on the face of the earth. And I would put that out as a challenge to anybody that would dispute that fact. Because we've done all the events together, and I just see pre-roll tubes just like flying. So what are you like? What's the sentiment, Scott?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I think there's a lot of people that, like, at state fair and stuff, and they're surprised. Like, they can't believe that they can actually purchase cannabis because, like, on site at a state fair. And so to be able to provide that experience and talk to the consumers about it, you know, they love it. I mean, it's a really, I mean, cannabis consumers are, I mean, it's an incredible group of people. Like, and I love hearing, everyone loves telling their stories about, everyone's got the first time, whether it's the first time they got high or a cool time or about a certain strain. There's like all this excitement. I don't hear that with alcoholic beverages, right? Like, you don't hear someone go, let me tell you about the first beer I ever had. Like, that doesn't happen, right? Or, you know, some creative way. But now it's, and even with this surfer collab, it's been so interesting to hear people tell me stories about surfing and cannabis. Like, specifically, now that we have this experience and this collab happening, I mean, people are coming out of the woodworks and texting me, and it's all really positive, but it's all telling, like, a lot of storytelling. And I think that is what I love also so much about these events is, you know, talking to the people and hearing their stories, and how do we integrate, you know, this plant that has been used for generations now into a new world that everyone is, you know, not everyone, but, you know, you're on your phone, or there's just so many different influences that, going back to just that, the core of human to human contact, talking about a shared love of something, whether that's this plant or surfing or whatever it might be, that I just really love that opportunity to share.
Yeah.
It's that storytelling that's such a part of the normalization process, right? Like, sharing those stories, connecting with people, building bonds and relationship, and normalizing it, right? Versus what it was, whatever, in the reefer madness days, right? That's the opposite side of storytelling of what we're trying to do, right? So it all kind of feeds into what we're talking about in this conversation.
Well, and Jake, I'm wondering what, because now Surfer Magazine has been around for 60 or 65 years.
65 years this year.
65 years. And this is the first time that they've ever done any sort of collab with cannabis. What has been, how has that been received? Because your magazine is owned by a large publishing company. So that's a huge step. It's not like you're some little scrappy mom and pop. It's like, let's do this. And,
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. And I mean, how many people subscribe to your magazine too?
We've got, I think in a month, we only have one magazine out a year coming right now. We have about 800,000 plus people come to the website every month.
That's amazing.
2.2 million on Instagram. And yeah, actually this morning, Scott, we were going through the final bits and pieces of the press release for the collab that'll go out, announcing the Surfer Humboldt Embarc collab. But everybody on the corporate side of the companies seems to be very excited. The vibes are up, and from the readers to the people in New York, it's it was a little, especially releasing a magazine with that ad in somewhere like Orange County. I was kind of waiting for at least somebody to be kind of like, yo, what are you guys doing here? But I haven't heard one single thing. And it's the drop is on Friday, so we're just kind of rolling into it. But in terms of feedback from the magazine, which has been out for a couple of weeks now, everything's been super positive and people are excited. And the biggest question I get is, where can they get it?
That's cool.
Or do you have any? How do I get samples? That's the biggest issue, is trying to just figure out how to pass the love around.
That's a success. That's how you know it's going well. Well, and Orange County, honestly, I know policy wise in the past we've had a lot of pushback, but there's a lot of stuff with cannabis going on in Orange County. It's starting to be booming. And historically, I had no idea until recently. The other year I was doing some creative work for a client, but there has been a history of growing cannabis in Orange County that's really rich as well. And we don't really talk about that much.
Yeah, it's an interesting place, right? Because it's kind of dubbed this conservative hotbed for California, but it's like anywhere when you give a big blanket statement like that, right? It's very diverse, it's very nuanced. There's different communities, there's beach culture, there's Disneyland, there's a large Hispanic population, and there's like down in South Orange County, there's a long agricultural history with all the citrus fruit and the lemon and orange trees, and it's Orange County,
Yeah.
They grew oranges a lot longer than they had traffic here. So, it's an interesting place. And it's one of those, it's sort of like when you see LA making the news, right? And to anybody that, like all of my friends, everybody that lives in Northern California, I live in LA, right? Anything like south of like Santa Barbara is like LA, and then you have San Diego. But it's, again, a very like nuanced, very diverse place with different communities. It's massive. It's large. Like LA is bigger than, I don't know, most of the states in our country, right?
Absolutely.
So to, again, storytelling and culture and all of those things are so important, because when you start understanding the nuance of it, it's not just like one narrative that goes across, right?
It really isn't. I mean, for those of us who live here, we understand what a big state California is and all the different cultures. Like, it's not just, SoCal, NorCal. There's a lot in between. And, we're the fourth largest economy in the world. I mean, that always gives me pause. I'm just like, wow, that's what we're doing. We're huge. But, everybody outside of California thinks that it's either, Hollywood or Haight-Ashbury. And it's very, very much, so much more than that. And that's, I think, one of the things I love about California cannabis culture is that it does run the gamut, and it really shows like what a melting pot our state is and how it really reflects the different, you're looking at like different brands, different companies, and how they reflect different cultures, because part of choosing products is seeing yourself in them and relating to them. And I think that that's just we see a lot of that in California. It's fascinating and beautiful. This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
It's interesting. My wife grew up in Siskiyou County, right kind of up by Scott, and in Siskiyou County they have a secessionist movement called the State of Jefferson. I don't know, Scott, do you ever come across those guys?
Oh yeah, I see flags and there's songs about it. Yeah.
And I was up, and Siskiyou County is the largest county in California by size, the smallest by population, and I was up there years ago, and I was like, so if you guys secede from the California or the Union or whatever, like, what's your, like, how are you going to make it work? And they were like, the three pillars of their economy were, they were going to cut down the redwoods and sell lumber, and they were going to do Bigfoot tourism and then cannabis. That was their, like, three pillars of success for them. So,
well, wait a minute. If you cut down the redwoods, where is Bigfoot going to live?
Right. On the farm, because you'll have more space to grow cannabis, I guess. I don't know. Turn Bigfoot into a farmer.
That's amazing. Because I can't believe how long we've been talking. This is wonderful. Like, there's so much more to cover, but as we're wrapping up, what are some things that you're really excited about this year, hopeful about, things that our listeners should be aware of?
I'm excited for Friday. I'll start there in the short term. We've been working on this with Scott and the Embarc team for a few months now. I don't know how long it's been specifically, but it's one of those that looked so far away on the calendar, and now we're here. And to be able to share this with the world, I think, what Embarc stands for with their retail side, and what Scott stands for with his craft farmers and small farmers and support of the industry in that regard. And then it's just such a perfect, fun way to kick off the first day of summer and the summer solstice.
It sure is.
Yeah, Jake, I think you said it well. I think starting with the solstice all the way through the rest of the year, we have so many, fun projects to work on. But I think, continuing to bring people together in a very divided world that we live in today, with this plant, with people that, I love to spend time with. I mean, Scott and I we're going to spend like 35 days together starting on June 11th. I mean, really taking cannabis all over the state, international, guests. And again, I think it really just comes back to, my first experience with cannabis and how this has pulled people together. And I think in this moment in time, I am hopeful, based on the political climate and where cannabis ranks as far as an issue and a priority for people, that cannabis will be a glue that's going to pull us back to the middle. And, just having some, that's what I believe is going to happen. And I think that we're going to make some headway this year.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and really this collab has really kind of given me a new kind of refocus on the importance of just helping people enjoy the ride of life, right? Like, I mean, this is an incredible thing that we're all participating in, and to be able to spend time and actually, I don't even consider it work. Like, this is like my my favorite thing that I do is help people enjoy their day-to-day, whether it's, with cannabis or with surfing or in their own communities. That's something that I think all of these events, when people come to joy, everyone's having such a good time. And I think that helps motivate me, get out of bed in the morning. And I'm hoping to surf more this year. That's what I'm looking forward to. And this collab has certainly motivated me to do that.
Yeah, that's total inspiration. And I
Yeah.
know that you have a lot of exciting things coming up in the year that we haven't talked about that aren't out yet. But for people who want to stay in the loop and learn more about that, first of all, how do they do that? And Embarc, you have a lot of stores in California, and I want to know where people can go because you are throughout California.
Yeah, and we have a delivery partnership thanks to Scott, again, the connector of great people, that's launching in the Sacramento region in early July. But yeah, you can find us throughout California. You can follow us at Embarc Supply, goembarc.com. But we're 16 stores today covering the state. Should wrap up the year around 20, and we're just going to continue to bring the best cannabis that California has to offer. And our goal is to be able to reach every customer in the state in short order.
I would.
Yeah, and we put together a little collaborative website called Explore Sungrown. And so if you go to exploresungrown.com, you can find out more about the Surfer collab, some of the other fun things that we're doing throughout the year in collaboration with Dustin and the team over at Embarc. And then, of course, Humboldt Family Farms, if you want to learn more about the farmers themselves, which I'm incredibly proud of, and kind of what's happening on the farm. But then as far as our engagements, exploresungrown.com is a great place to go.
Yeah, and follow everybody on social media too, because you all put out great content. I mean, it's summer, it's surfing, it's cannabis, it's music, it's all the things that make this time of year just so incredibly special. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to share this with our listeners. And Dustin, sorry for getting a little bit nerdy on the policy side, because I know we were going to be we were just going to have the fun talk today, but I couldn't help it because you were here and we had to talk about it. But I would love.
No apology. I love it.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad. And I'm really looking forward to having more conversations with all of you and just the exciting things that are going on. So, have a wonderful summer. Could everybody give their tags for social media too before we take off?
Yep, we're at Surfer Mag on Instagram, Surfer Magazine. You'll find us.
Yeah.
Embarc Supply.
And Humboldt Family Farms.
Awesome.
All one word. Yeah, and I'm so grateful to you, Jake, and Dustin, to you and your teams, and Sara for helping get the message out there about this project. Like I said, I'm just so thankful.
So everybody come to see us at the State Fair. I'm judging, so I'll be there, and I'll probably be doing some other activations. There's going to be some exciting things with the awards. There's going to be great products. You're going to be able to see Humboldt Family Farms there and Embarc. So come join us there. Come see some concerts, enjoy some good cannabis, and just enjoy the summer. It's a beautiful time and some wonderful activations to get everyone excited. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Payan on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.